I want you to pause for a second and imagine this with me because the way this story begins isn't just about what happened to me, it's about something that could happen to anyone who's ever trusted the person lying next to them at night. Picture this. It's late, the world outside is silent, the only sound is the hum of the night and the rhythm of your partner's breathing beside you. You roll over, not out of suspicion, not out of fear, but simply because sleep hasn't come yet, and you're watching the person you love in their most vulnerable state. There's something peaceful about it, almost sacred, watching the rise and fall of their chest. And then, out of nowhere, their lips part, and they whisper a name you've never heard before. Not just mumbling nonsense, not the kind of garbled dream talk you laugh off in the morning, but a full, clear name, one that sticks in your head instantly. And it doesn't belong to anyone you know. Tell me honestly, what would you do in that moment? Would you wake them? Would you ask them about it later? Or would you stay frozen, heart pounding, already feeling like something in your marriage, something in your home, had shifted forever? Because that's exactly where I found myself, and that single moment became the start of a mystery that would shake the very foundation of my life. Now, I know why you're here. You clicked on this video because the title already got inside your head. You're asking yourself, whose name did she say? Why did she say it? Was it an affair, a secret past, something darker? And here's the truth, you're going to get the answers. Not half of them. Not some shallow explanation. By the end of this story, you'll understand every detail of what I uncovered, but I need you to stay with me, because the answers only mean something if you walk through the confusion, the doubt, and the fear the way I did. This isn't just a story you watch, it's a story you feel, and I promise you by the time we reach the end, you'll understand why I couldn't just forget that whisper. Let me connect with you directly here because I know you've had those moments in your own life where something small, something almost too strange to notice, ended up spiraling into something much bigger. Maybe you found a text you didn't recognize on a loved one's phone, maybe you've heard your child say something they couldn't possibly know, maybe you've walked into a room and felt like something was off without being able to explain it. That's what makes stories like this so powerful. We don't just watch them, we see pieces of ourselves in them. And tonight, as you're listening to me, I want you to keep asking yourself, if this happened in my bed with my spouse, what would I do? Because this story isn't just mine anymore, it's yours too, and the deeper we go, the harder it will be for you to look away. It started on an ordinary night, the kind where nothing feels extraordinary until it suddenly does. I'd been restless, scrolling through my phone, half reading emails, half thinking about work, and when I finally put it down, I turned toward her. My wife, the woman I had promised my life to, looked like every picture of innocence in that moment, hair spilling across the pillow, lips parted, breath steady. And then it happened. She whispered it. A man's name. Not rushed, not fleeting, but deliberate, like she had called out to him before. I sat up instantly, my mind racing. Who was he? Why that name? Was it someone she knew now or someone from her past? The worst part wasn't the name itself. It was the way she said it, soft and tender, like the way she used to say mine when we were first in love. That broke me in a way I can't describe. I didn't wake her that night. I didn't dare. Maybe you're already thinking that was a mistake, and maybe it was, but in that moment I needed time. I lay awake the rest of the night, every tick of the clock dragging me further from the comfort of ignorance and deeper into a well of questions I didn't know how to climb out of. And I know some of you watching right now have done the same thing. You've kept something to yourself, hoping for the right moment, trying to figure out whether you were overreacting or whether your whole world had just shifted. That's what I was doing. And little did I know, that single whisper wasn't just a crack in the glass of our marriage, it was the sound of the whole thing beginning to shatter. The next morning felt different. I watched her move around the kitchen like nothing had happened, pouring coffee, humming under her breath, smiling at me with the same familiar warmth. But every time she looked at me, all I could hear was that name echoing in my head. I won't tell you what it was yet, not here at the beginning, because the weight of it only makes sense once you see everything I saw, once you understand why that name should have been impossible to hear from her lips. But I'll tell you this, it wasn't a name you forget, not the kind you confuse with dream talk, not the kind that slips away with the morning light. No, this was something real, and it was about to change everything. Here's where you need to lean in, because this is the part where most people would brush it off. They'd tell themselves it was nothing, just random brain noise. But you and I both know better. Our instincts tell us when something is off, and ignoring them only makes the truth come back harder. I couldn't shake it. And I promise you, as you hear the rest of this, you won't be able to shake it either. By the end, you're going to find yourself replaying the faces of the people in your own life, wondering what secrets are locked behind closed doors, what whispers are being spoken when you're not awake to hear them. That's why this story matters. It's not just about me, it's about the unsettling reality that we don't ever really know the people we think we know best. But before I take you into the investigation, before I tell you how I started pulling at the threads that would unravel everything I believed about my wife, I want you to sit with the question that haunted me from that first night. Who was he? Because names aren't accidents. Names carry history, identity, memory. And when someone you love whispers one in their sleep, it's not just sound, it's confession. And the name my wife whispered wasn't just anyone's. It was the name of someone I was never supposed to hear. And here's where I leave you for now, right on the edge of the moment where everything was about to change. Because the truth about that name, about why she said it, about what it revealed, will not only shock you, it will make you rethink the very idea of trust. So stay with me, because this is only the beginning. I didn't tell her what I'd heard, not that first day, not even in the days that followed, because the truth is, I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding paranoid or insecure. That's the trap, isn't it? The moment you question your partner about something they said in their sleep, you risk sounding crazy, and if they laugh it off, you're the one left looking like the fool. So I kept quiet, but I started noticing things that I swear I would have overlooked before. It was as if that whisper had unlocked a different lens in my mind, and suddenly every little detail of her behavior felt charged with meaning. I found myself watching her more closely, not in a loving way, but in a way that scared me, like I was looking for cracks in something I thought had been unshakable. She'd smile when her phone buzzed, and I'd wonder who was on the other end. She'd go quiet during dinner, her eyes drifting somewhere far away, and I'd wonder if she was thinking of him, of the man whose name had slipped out in the middle of the night. And here's the thing I need you to understand, it's not that I didn't trust her before. It's that trust, once wounded, once pierced by something so small and yet so telling, doesn't heal in silence. It festers. It grows. And in my case, it became the obsession that drove me down a path I could never turn back from. We'd been married for 6 years, and for the most part, life had been steady, almost predictable. We bought a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where you wave at your neighbors on Sunday mornings and pretend not to notice when their trash bins are overflowing. I worked long hours at my job, and she stayed busy with her projects, sometimes volunteering, sometimes painting, sometimes disappearing into the kind of hobbies that didn't always interest me but made her happy. On the surface, everything looked normal. But looking back now, I can see the subtle ways we had started drifting apart. Conversations that used to stretch late into the night had become small talk over dinner. Date nights that were once spontaneous had turned into routines penciled into calendars. And maybe that's the dangerous part of marriage. You stop looking for cracks until something forces you to, and by then it's often too late. Still, none of that explained the name. None of that could tell me why she whispered it so tenderly in her sleep, as though her heart was reaching for someone else. And that's when my mind began building suspects, even before I wanted it to. It's funny, isn't it? How fast the human brain turns suspicion into stories. I thought about the people in her life, the men she might have known, the ones who might linger in memory. There was Mark, her co-worker from a project 2 years ago, the one who used to text her late at night with work questions that always seemed just a little too casual. There was Daniel, her old college friend who had once confessed feelings for her before she met me, someone she insisted was just a friend, even though I noticed the way his eyes lit up when they bumped into each other at the grocery store last Christmas. And then there were the names I didn't know, the strangers she might have crossed paths with, the ones I couldn't predict, and that unknown was the scariest suspect of all. But here's where it gets complicated. Because while my mind was drawing lines between her and these possibilities, I also started questioning myself. Was I imagining all of it? Had I been so consumed by one whisper that I was now seeing shadows where there weren't any? That's what makes situations like this so cruel. You can't tell if you're losing your grip on reality or finally seeing it clearly for the first time. And I know some of you listening have been there too. You've gone through your partner's phone when they left the room. You've noticed how quickly they flipped their screen when you walked by. You've wondered if that unexplained late-night call was really just a wrong number. And even if you've never said it out loud, you know the way those doubts dig into you, how they refuse to let go until you either find the truth or destroy yourself trying. I remember one night in particular, about a week after I heard her whisper that name. We were sitting on the couch watching one of those trending Netflix thrillers everyone had been talking about, the kind where you're supposed to lose yourself in the story. But I couldn't focus. I kept glancing at her, at the way her hand rested on her lap, at the way her eyes stayed locked on the screen as though she were avoiding mine. And then her phone buzzed. She reached for it instantly, faster than she usually did, and tilted the screen away as she unlocked it. My chest tightened. I told myself not to read into it, but my brain wouldn't stop. Who was she texting? What could be so urgent during a movie night at home? She put the phone back down without saying a word, but my mind was already racing. I didn't ask her then. I didn't want to tip my hand to show her that I was watching her differently now. But inside, I was cataloging every moment, every glance, every silence. That was when I started to see patterns, or maybe I started to invent them. She'd go out for errands and take longer than usual to return. She'd smile faintly at texts and then quickly clear them from her screen. And sometimes, late at night, she'd turn over in her sleep and mumble again. Not always clearly, not always that same name, but enough to make me lean in closer, desperate to catch a word, terrified of what I might hear. And I need to tell you something important. Obsession doesn't start with big discoveries. It starts with small ones. It starts with a whisper in the night, a glance at the wrong time, a smile that lingers too long. And then it grows until it consumes every thought you have. But here's the kicker. Just when I was convinced I was piecing together the truth, something else happened that sent me spinning in a completely different direction. I was going through the mail one evening, and tucked in between the bills and junk flyers was an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper typed, with just one sentence on it. Do you know who your wife really is? That was it. No signature. No explanation. Just that one line. And suddenly, the mystery wasn't just about the name she whispered in her sleep. It was about everything. I remember staring at that note for what felt like hours, my pulse pounding in my ears. Someone out there knew something. Someone out there wanted me to start asking questions I had been too afraid to voice. And in that moment, all the suspects in my mind grew darker, all the red herrings multiplied. Because it wasn't just about a man's name anymore, it was about secrets I didn't even know I should be questioning. And that, right there, was the moment I realized my life was no longer ordinary. Whatever path I was about to walk down, there was no turning back. And I couldn't help but wonder if the person I thought I knew best, the woman lying next to me every night, was really a stranger. I kept that note hidden in my desk drawer for days, pulling it out again and again like it might change if I looked at it long enough. Every time I read the words, "Do you know who your wife really is?" they cut deeper, and the more I stared at them, the more I realized how little I actually knew. We'd been together for years, but when I really thought about it, there were gaps in her stories, pieces of her past that she never really opened up about. She had always brushed off questions about her childhood, telling me her family was complicated and she didn't like dwelling on it. She had never introduced me to more than a handful of her friends, and most of those were people she had met after we were already married. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I told myself not everyone likes to dwell on the past. But now, with this note in my hand and her whisper still haunting me, those gaps felt like shadows and I couldn't ignore them anymore. So I started digging, quietly at first, trying to piece things together without tipping her off. I went back through old photo albums, but I noticed something strange. Whole stretches of her life were missing. There were pictures from her teenage years, but then there was a gap, a whole stretch of time she never seemed to document. I remembered once asking her about that, and she told me she lost some of her photos in a move. At the time it sounded innocent, but now it felt like an excuse. I checked through the boxes in our attic, thinking maybe she kept things tucked away, but all I found were scattered keepsakes, birthday cards from people I didn't recognize, a worn-out bracelet, and a diary with the first half ripped out. That detail chilled me. It wasn't just a missing photo or two. It was a missing history. But the deeper I tried to dig, the more obstacles I seemed to hit. One night, I went back to the drawer to pull out the note again, thinking maybe I should take it to a friend or even the police, just to see if there was a way to trace who had sent it. But when I opened the drawer, it was gone. At first, I thought maybe I had moved it and forgotten, but I tore the room apart, checked every book, every folder, every pocket where I might have slipped it. Nothing. The note had disappeared. And here's the part that made my stomach twist. It meant someone had been in that drawer. Someone knew I had it. And the only person with easy access to that drawer was her. Did she find it? Did she take it? If she did, why hadn't she said anything? That was the first moment I felt real fear. Not suspicion, not doubt, but fear. Because if she had seen the note, she knew what I knew. And if she knew, then she was letting me walk around the house every day pretending nothing had changed, while she decided what to do about me behind my back. That silence was scarier than any confession. It meant she was in control and I was just trying to catch up. The strangest thing happened after that. The people around me started acting different too. A few days later, I ran into one of our neighbors, an older woman who'd lived on the block for decades. She'd always been chatty, always asking about our garden or our weekend plans. But this time, when I mentioned my wife's name in passing, her smile faltered. She hesitated, like she was about to say something, but then shook her head and told me to take care of myself. I pressed her, asked her what she meant, but she just mumbled something about not getting involved in other people's business, and walked away faster than I'd ever seen her move. That moment stuck with me. It felt like she knew something she wasn't willing to share, something about my wife, something she thought I'd be better off not knowing. That night, I couldn't stop turning it over in my head. Why would a neighbor, someone who barely knows us beyond small talk, suddenly act like she was warning me off without saying the words? Was it possible my wife's secret went beyond her past, that it stretched into the lives of the people living around us now? The thought was ridiculous, and yet the more I sat with it, the less ridiculous it seemed. Because the truth is, secrets have a way of spilling over, of touching everyone in their path, even those who pretend not to notice. I decided I needed help, but even that was tricky. I thought about confiding in a friend, but most of our social circle came through her, and I didn't know who I could trust. Eventually I reached out to my brother. He's the kind of guy who doesn't believe in drama, who rolls his eyes at conspiracy theories, which is exactly why I thought he'd be the perfect person to ground me. I told him about the name she whispered, about the note, about the missing evidence. For a long time he just sat there listening, not saying much. Then he leaned forward, looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you keep digging, you'd better be ready for the answer. Some truths don't let you sleep at night." That wasn't the comfort I wanted. It felt less like advice and more like a warning. And when I asked him if he thought I should stop, he didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. He just reminded me that once you pull the thread, you can't push it back in. Still, I couldn't let it go. Especially not after what happened next. I was cleaning up the living room one afternoon when I found something wedged under the couch cushion. A photograph I had never seen before. It was my wife, younger, maybe in her 20s, standing with a group of people I didn't recognize. They weren't smiling. They weren't posing. It looked like the picture had been snapped in the middle of something serious, almost like an argument. And here's the strangest part. The photo had a crease right through the middle, as if someone had folded it hard, and on the back there was handwriting. A name. The same name she had whispered in her sleep. I froze with that photo in my hand, my pulse racing, my throat dry. This was the first piece of solid evidence, the first undeniable connection between her dream and her past. But even as I held it, I felt a surge of dread. Because if this picture existed, if it had been hidden under our couch, then someone had put it there. And the question wasn't just who these people were, or why that name kept circling back. It was why the photograph had been planted for me to find. Was it a clue? A warning? A trap? And just as I was starting to believe I finally had a lead, the sound of the front door opening snapped me out of my thoughts. She was home early. I stuffed the photo into my pocket before she could see it, but as she stepped into the room and smiled at me, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe she already knew. Maybe she was watching me just as closely as I was watching her. And that's where everything shifted, because the more I dug, the clearer it became. I wasn't just uncovering her secrets. Someone else was pulling the strings, someone who wanted me to see pieces of the truth but not the whole picture. And the question I couldn't answer was why. I carried that photograph in my pocket for days, folding and unfolding it until the crease grew deeper, as if the act of handling it might somehow release the answers I was desperate to find. I couldn't stop staring at the name written on the back, the same name my wife had whispered in her sleep, the same name that had been gnawing at the edges of my sanity ever since. I kept wondering if it was a coincidence, but the more I thought about it, the less I believed in coincidences. Someone wanted me to see this picture, someone wanted me to follow the trail, and yet, the closer I got to it, the more I felt like I was being pulled into a game I didn't understand. Every time I thought I had the upper hand, another detail slipped away, like the missing note that had vanished from my desk. I started to feel watched, like my every move was being anticipated, and I hated that sense of being one step behind. But just when I thought I was the only one tangled in this strange puzzle, the story took a turn I never expected. One evening, my phone buzzed with a call from my brother. His voice sounded off, sharp and uneasy in a way that instantly put me on edge. He told me he'd gotten something in the mail that day, an envelope that looked eerily similar to the one I had received. And inside, there wasn't a note this time, there was a photograph. Not of him, not of me, but of my wife. She was standing outside somewhere, maybe a store or a gas station, and the photo was recent, taken within the last week. On the back, scrawled in the same type of writing I'd seen before, was a question that made my skin crawl. Does he know where she was that night? My brother said he almost didn't tell me, but he figured if someone was trying to get to him, it was really meant for me. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about me and my marriage anymore. Whoever was behind this knew how to widen the circle, how to pull in the people closest to me to amplify the pressure. They weren't content to whisper questions in my ear, they wanted to surround me with doubt until I broke. And I'll admit, for the first time I felt truly powerless. Because now it wasn't just my own judgment I had to question, it was everyone's. My brother swore he hadn't told anyone about our earlier conversation, swore he hadn't mentioned it even in passing. But if that was true, how did someone know to target him? How did they know the exact moment to tighten the noose? I met up with him the next day to see the photo myself, and when I held it in my hands, the reality sank in even harder. The handwriting on the back matched exactly, the paper stock was the same, the faint chemical smell of printer ink identical to the note I had once hidden away. This wasn't random. It was connected, deliberate, and someone out there wanted to push me into a corner. I asked my brother if he'd noticed anything unusual lately, anyone following him, anything that felt out of place. He hesitated before admitting that 2 nights earlier, he thought he saw someone sitting in a car outside his apartment, headlights off, just idling. When he looked back again a few minutes later, the car was gone. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, with that photo in his hand, it felt like a piece of the same puzzle. The worst part was that the message on the photo directly contradicted what I thought I knew. I had been so sure my wife's secret was buried in her past, hidden in names and photographs from years ago. But this message suggested otherwise, that there was something happening right now, in the present, that I didn't know about. It wasn't just about who she used to be, it was about what she was doing when I wasn't looking. And suddenly, every late-night errand, every unexplained delay, every quick glance at her phone felt more sinister than before. The narrative I'd been building in my head wasn't enough anymore. The mystery wasn't locked in old history, it was unfolding around me in real time. That realization left me reeling. Who could I trust if not my own wife? Who could I turn to if even my brother, the one person I thought I could lean on, was being dragged into the same nightmare? I started replaying every recent interaction in my mind, searching for hidden meanings, for signs I might have missed. The neighbor's strange warning, my brother's uneasy advice, the vanishing note, the planted photo, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle, but none of them fit together yet. And maybe that was the most terrifying part, because puzzles are supposed to reveal a picture when completed, but this one seemed designed to keep me lost. I found myself walking through the house differently after that. I listened for creaks on the stairs, glanced out the window at passing cars, lingered too long in front of closed doors. At night, I would lie in bed next to her, watching the soft rise and fall of her breath, waiting to see if she would whisper again. Sometimes she did, mumbling words I couldn't quite make out, and other times she slept silently as if she knew I was listening. I wanted to shake her awake and demand answers, but something inside me held back. Maybe it was fear of what she would say. Maybe it was fear that she would look me in the eye and lie without hesitation. Either way, the silence between us became a weight I carried everywhere. And just when I thought I couldn't take any more, something happened that made me question everything I thought I knew about loyalty and betrayal. I received another envelope, slipped under my windshield wiper while I was parked outside the grocery store. This time there was no photo, no question. Just a single folded page, blank except for one line typed in bold letters. Stop digging or you won't like what you find. I sat in that parking lot with the note trembling in my hands, my pulse hammering. Whoever was behind this wasn't just taunting me anymore, they were threatening me. And it wasn't just about secrets or whispers in the dark. It was about danger. Real danger. The kind that doesn't stop once you uncover the truth. And as I looked around the lot, scanning faces, searching for anyone who might have slipped that note under my car, I realized something that chilled me to the core. Maybe the threat wasn't just about me anymore. Maybe it was about everyone close to me. My brother. My neighbors. Maybe even the people I hadn't thought to question yet. Because if someone out there was willing to cross that line, then the stakes weren't just high, they were deadly. And the scariest part was I still didn't know who to fear more. The stranger sending the threats or the woman sleeping peacefully beside me every night. It was the night after I found the note on my windshield when everything shifted from unsettling to terrifying, the moment when I realized this wasn't just some twisted game of secrets and half-truths but something much darker and more dangerous than I had let myself believe. I was driving home late, the streets quiet, the kind of silence that presses against you and makes every sound feel magnified. At first, I thought it was just my paranoia creeping in again, the constant hum of suspicion that had followed me since this whole ordeal began. But then I noticed it, a black SUV trailing behind me. It wasn't close enough to seem aggressive, but it was steady, matching every turn I made. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just another driver heading in the same direction. But then I took a detour through a neighborhood I never usually drove through, and when I glanced in my mirror, the SUV was still there. That's when the chill set in, the kind that crawls down your spine and makes you grip the wheel tighter without even realizing it. I tried to play it smart, pulling into a gas station to see if they would pass by, but the SUV pulled in too, idling near the edge of the lot like they were waiting me out. I sat there for a long moment, pretending to scroll through my phone while my heart raced, pretending like I wasn't watching them. Finally, when I pulled back onto the road, they followed again, keeping that same measured distance, close enough to let me know they were there but far enough to keep me guessing. I didn't lead them home. I couldn't. The thought of them knowing where I lived, where my wife slept, where every secret was unraveling, it made my stomach turn. Instead, I drove aimlessly, looping through streets, cutting across town, and it wasn't until nearly an hour later that I realized they were gone. But that hour changed everything. Because now I knew I wasn't imagining it. Someone was following me, someone who knew exactly who I was and exactly where to find me. That night I barely slept. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every possibility. Who was in that SUV? Was it connected to the letters, the photos, the whispers? Or was it someone else entirely, another shadow in a story already too crowded with suspicion? And then came the darker question, the one that gnawed at me and refused to let go. Was my wife part of it? Was she the one pulling the strings, feeding someone information, keeping me in the dark while I stumbled through the pieces of a puzzle that was never mine to solve? I wanted to believe she wasn't, but every time I remembered the way she had whispered that name, the way her phone lit up with messages she never explained, I felt that belief crumble a little more. But the real breaking point came the next morning when I tried calling my brother. After everything that had happened, I needed to hear his voice to ground myself, to remind myself I wasn't completely alone in this. His phone rang and then went straight to voicemail. I tried again and again but nothing. At first I thought maybe he was busy, maybe he was sleeping in, but by noon when I still hadn't heard back, dread began to settle in. I drove over to his apartment, knocked on the door until my knuckles hurt, but there was no answer. His car wasn't in the lot, and when I asked a neighbor if they had seen him, they just shook their head and said not since yesterday evening. That was when panic set in. Because my brother wasn't the type to vanish. He wasn't the type to ignore his phone. And after everything, the envelope, the photo of my wife, the shadow of someone sitting outside his place, I couldn't convince myself this was a coincidence. I drove around aimlessly after that, the city suddenly feeling smaller and darker, every face on the street a potential threat, every car in my mirror a potential tale. I kept thinking about the note that warned me to stop digging, about the SUV that had followed me, about my brother disappearing without a trace. It was like every move I made was being watched, every step I took was being anticipated, and the walls were closing in fast. I thought about going to the police, but what would I even say? That my wife whispered a name in her sleep and now I was being followed? That someone sent me a note and now my brother wasn't answering his phone? They would think I was paranoid, maybe even unstable. And maybe that's exactly what whoever was behind this wanted, to isolate me, to make me doubt my own grip on reality until I stopped looking for answers. That night, sitting alone in my car outside my own house, I stared at the front door for what felt like hours, trying to convince myself it was safe to go inside. I thought about my wife waiting for me, maybe asleep, maybe pretending to be. I thought about the photo hidden in my drawer upstairs, about the missing note, about the neighbor's warning. And for the first time since this all began, I realized I wasn't just suspicious anymore, I was scared for my life. Not because I thought I was imagining shadows, but because I knew the shadows were real and they were closing in. When I finally walked inside, everything felt different. The house wasn't home anymore. It was a stage and I was being watched. I half expected to find her awake, waiting for me, but she was asleep in bed, her breathing steady, her face peaceful. I stood there in the dark, staring at her, wondering who she really was, wondering if she was dreaming of him again, wondering if she even knew the danger I was in, or if she was the one who put me there. And as I stood there, my phone buzzed in my pocket with a new message from an unknown number. My hands shook as I opened it, and when I read the words, my heart nearly stopped. It said, "He's gone because of you. You should have stopped when you had the chance." Asterisk. The moment I thought things couldn't spiral any further, everything flipped upside down in a way I never could have prepared for. Up until now, I had been clinging to the belief that if I just kept pulling at the threads, eventually the truth would reveal itself, and maybe then I could make sense of the name my wife whispered in her sleep. But then something happened that shattered that fragile idea and forced me to realize that not only was the mystery bigger than I thought, but it was also far more dangerous. It started with a conversation I had with someone I trusted. Someone I believed was on my side in this, who suddenly opened their mouth and dropped a truth so devastating it made me question everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, and even myself. And the craziest part is, it didn't feel like a revelation. It felt like they had been waiting for the right moment to say it, like they knew all along that this was going to come crashing down and were just holding back until the timing hurt the most. They told me the name my wife whispered wasn't just a random slip from a dream. It wasn't a stranger and it wasn't a coincidence. The name belonged to someone real, someone I apparently should have known but somehow didn't. I remember just sitting there, staring at them, my mind going blank while they explained in this calm, measured tone that years ago, long before my wife and I even met, there had been an event, a tragedy of sorts, that connected her to this name. The only problem? When I tried to get more details, when I begged them to just tell me exactly who this person was, they pulled back. They refused. They said, "It's not my story to tell," and left me with more questions than answers. At that moment, I realized this wasn't about protecting me, it was about protecting themselves. And that made me realize something else. The people I thought were helping me may not have been helping at all. They might have been guiding me, steering me, keeping me from uncovering something I wasn't supposed to find. It was a plot twist I never saw coming because the very ground I thought I was standing on was suddenly unstable. Imagine thinking the person you married, the person you trusted with your life, had secrets that kept you up at night. Now imagine finding out the very people you turned to for answers were holding their own secrets, ones that twisted the story even more. Suddenly I couldn't trust anyone. Not my family, not my friends, not even the people I thought were just bystanders. Every conversation I replayed in my head felt loaded with hidden meaning. Every glance, every hesitation, every silence became suspicious. And the terrifying part was that it wasn't just about my wife anymore. This name, this hidden story seemed to touch everyone around me. I tried going back through everything, old messages, things my wife had said, things I had brushed off as nothing, and with this new information in the back of my mind, all of it looked different. I realized there were patterns I hadn't noticed before, inconsistencies I had ignored because I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. But now, those small cracks in the surface looked like they were hiding something massive underneath. And the more I tried to confront my wife, the more I felt like she knew I was getting closer to the truth. Her eyes darted in ways they hadn't before. Her words felt rehearsed. There was a distance between us that hadn't been there, a wall she had put up, and I couldn't tell if it was because she was scared, guilty, or protecting something she didn't want me to see. The twist wasn't just in the story, it was in my perception of reality itself. I wasn't sure anymore what was true, who was lying, or even what my own memory was worth. Because if this name, this whispered secret, had been hovering around us for years without me knowing, what else had I been blind to? What else had I been living beside without realizing? It was as though my entire life had been rewritten behind my back, and I was only now being handed the unedited script. But here's the part that will really make you stop and think, because this is where the plot twisted into something darker than I could have ever imagined. The person who told me about the name? They didn't come forward out of kindness or loyalty or even guilt. They came forward because they wanted me to do something. They wanted me to confront my wife directly, force the truth out of her because, according to them, I had been living in a lie for far too long. But the way they pushed it, the urgency in their voice, made me feel like I was being manipulated. Like this wasn't about helping me, it was about pushing me into a role I didn't ask to play in a story I didn't write. And that's when it hit me. Maybe this whole time I wasn't the one uncovering the mystery. Maybe I was being played, pushed into unraveling it on someone else's timeline. Think about that for a second. Imagine every step you've taken, every choice you thought was yours, was actually guided by someone else's hand, someone else's agenda. That's what I started to realize. And the twist here, the part that keeps me up at night even now, is that once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I couldn't go back to believing I was just an innocent bystander in this. I was a piece on the board, being moved, tested, maybe even sacrificed. And when you realize that kind of truth, when it dawns on you that you've been living under the illusion of control, it's the most unsettling feeling in the world. So now the mystery isn't just about who this name belongs to, or what my wife has been hiding. It's about who's pulling the strings, who's really writing this story, and why I've been dragged into it in the first place. And just when I thought I was beginning to understand, when I thought I could finally put the pieces together, something else happened that ripped the rug out from under me all over again. Because that name, the one whispered in the dark, suddenly showed up in the most unexpected place, tied to something I thought had absolutely nothing to do with my life. And when I saw it, carved into something that should have been impossible, I realized this story wasn't just about my wife's secrets. It was about mine too. It felt like the ground beneath me was shifting, like every new discovery didn't bring me closer to the truth but only dragged me deeper into a pit of questions I wasn't prepared to answer. The more I tried to trace the whispers of that strange name, the more I uncovered layers of secrecy surrounding my wife that I didn't know how to process. And just when I thought things couldn't get any heavier, I was forced into a corner where choices became impossible. Choices that would change everything about my life and possibly destroy what little sense of stability I had left. One night, as I sat alone in the living room staring at the empty glow of the TV, the silence of the house pressing down on me, my phone lit up with a message. It wasn't from an unknown number this time, it was from my wife. She was upstairs, asleep, and yet the words on my phone made my blood run cold. It read, "Don't ask about the name. Don't ever ask. Or you'll lose more than you can imagine." My heart clenched as I reread it, my mind spinning. Was she awake and warning me? Was someone else using her phone? Or worse, was she part of something I couldn't bring myself to admit? I wanted to storm upstairs and shake her awake, demand an explanation, but something stopped me. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was survival instinct, but I sat frozen, staring at her words and wondering how deep this rabbit hole really went. I thought about showing her the message the next morning, pretending I had just seen it, but even then the thought made me sick. If she had sent it herself, then my wife was hiding something so big she was willing to threaten me to keep it secret. And if she hadn't, then someone else had access to her phone and was close enough to know my every move. That thought made me feel watched in a way I had never experienced before, like my life had been turned into a stage and I was the only one unaware of the audience. What made it worse was the sense of betrayal gnawing at me. I had promised myself I would protect her, that I would find answers for both of us, but now I couldn't shake the growing fear that she wasn't on my side. The tension between us thickened over the following days. Every word felt like it carried double meaning, every glance lingered too long, every silence screamed louder than any argument could. I started noticing the little things, the way she avoided eye contact when I asked about her day, the way she locked her phone whenever she left the room, the way she seemed distracted, almost rehearsed, when she spoke to me. At the same time, I was drowning in my own paranoia. I didn't want to become the kind of husband who doubted his wife, but the evidence kept stacking against her. And then came the breaking point. She confronted me. Late one night, she looked at me with eyes that seemed colder than I remembered, and she asked why I kept watching her, why I stayed awake at night when I thought she couldn't tell. Her tone wasn't angry, it was almost calm. Too calm. It was the kind of calm that came with knowing more than you were saying. When I hesitated, she leaned in and whispered, "Stop looking. If you love me, stop looking." That sentence carved into me like a knife. I wish I could tell you that I listened to her, that I trusted her enough to let it go, but you and I both know that once you catch the scent of something wrong, you can't just walk away. The human brain won't allow it. Curiosity, fear, survival, they all blend together until stopping isn't an option anymore. That's where I was. But this time, I wasn't just battling the mystery of some name whispered in the dark. I was battling my wife, the woman I had built my life with. And that's where the impossible choice hit me hardest. Was I supposed to stay quiet, play along, and protect what was left of our fragile marriage, even if it meant living in ignorance? Or was I supposed to risk it all, press harder, and dig until I reached the truth even if it destroyed us both? Every option felt like a trap. The worst part was, the universe didn't even give me time to weigh those choices carefully. Within days of her warning, another message appeared, but this time, it wasn't on my phone. It was taped to the inside of my car windshield, waiting for me when I left for work. The handwriting was jagged, rushed, like someone had written it in a panic. It read, "You already know too much. Leave before she makes you leave." My stomach dropped as I held it, my hands trembling so hard I could barely keep the paper steady. Whoever had written this knew where I lived, knew my schedule, knew enough to break into my car and plant a message without being seen. And the words themselves, they confirmed the darkest suspicion I hadn't wanted to face. The danger wasn't some outside figure lurking in the shadows, it was coming from inside my own home. You see, this is what makes the story terrifying. When the threat is a stranger, you can run, you can hide, you can fight back. But when the threat might be the person lying next to you every night, the one who knows your weaknesses, your routines, your blind spots, where do you turn? That's the trap I found myself in. And as much as I wanted to dismiss the note as some cruel prank, the fear in my gut told me it was real. That was the moment I realized I didn't have the luxury of time anymore. My wife knew things she wasn't telling me. Someone else knew things they wanted me to stop uncovering. And now I was standing in the middle, forced to choose between silence and truth, between survival and betrayal. But here's the thing you need to understand, and I want you to really feel this with me. Once you hit this point in life, there's no going back to normal. You can't just tuck the sheets around yourself at night, kiss your spouse goodnight, and pretend everything's fine. No, every sound becomes a threat, every touch feels calculated, every word seems like it carries a hidden meaning. That's where I was, trapped in a world where my wife might be the person I loved most in the world, or she might be the person I should fear most. And just when I thought the choice couldn't get any harder, another twist slammed into me, one that shattered whatever illusions I was clinging to about who I could trust. Because the very next night, when I worked up the courage to confront her with the note I had found in my car, she looked at me, not with confusion, not with guilt, but with something else entirely. A strange sadness. And then she whispered a sentence that nearly stopped my heart. She said, "I tried to protect you from this, but now, it's too late." It was only when the pieces of the puzzle began shifting into place that I realized I had been looking at everything too narrowly, as if the mystery of that whispered name was just about my wife and me. But the truth was that it wasn't just ours to carry, it was much bigger, wider, and far more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. I started noticing how people in our neighborhood reacted when I casually mentioned certain things, how conversations seemed to stall when I brought up odd coincidences, and how eyes darted away like they'd been caught holding on to something they didn't want me to see. Even people I thought I could trust, our neighbors, co-workers, even family friends, suddenly felt like potential players in a game I hadn't realized I was part of. That's when the danger stopped being subtle. It started creeping into every corner of my life, and I couldn't tell if the paranoia was something I'd built up in my head or if I had finally stumbled into a truth no one wanted me to see. And the scariest part? Both possibilities felt equally real. It became clear the moment I traced the name my wife whispered back to a record, something buried in old files that weren't supposed to be touched anymore. The document wasn't even supposed to exist, and yet there it was. A connection between her, a time long before we'd met, and a group of people whose history seemed stitched together with secrets and half-truths. I thought maybe it was a coincidence or maybe I was making too much of a common name, but then I found the dates. They lined up too neatly, as if someone had gone to great lengths to erase the timeline but left behind just enough for me to stumble onto. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized how carefully orchestrated everything had been. Even the arguments we'd had, the stress in our marriage, the sudden distance. It all started looking like someone had been pulling the strings, pushing us toward a place where I would finally question everything. That was the moment I felt the walls closing in. This wasn't just about my wife muttering a name in her sleep. This was about a story much bigger, one that had been written long before I entered it. The betrayal hit hardest when it came from someone I had leaned on for support. My closest friend, the one who had been checking in on me, who had pretended to be the voice of reason when I was falling apart, slipped just once, but it was enough. A phone call that ended too quickly when I entered the room, a slip of paper with that same name folded in his jacket pocket, a hesitation in his voice when I asked simple questions about where he'd been the night I followed my wife. The weight of it almost crushed me. Because it wasn't just about trust, it was about realizing I had been walking through a minefield without knowing it, confiding in someone who had been feeding the other side with everything I thought was safe to share. Suddenly, every memory with him felt poisoned, every joke, every drink we'd shared over the years. The realization that someone you love like family could be working against you is like a wound that doesn't stop bleeding, because it rewrites your whole life in one instant. And worse, it proved that this wasn't just my wife's secret. It was mine too, whether I wanted it or not. What terrified me most wasn't the betrayal, though, it was the silence. The way people stopped talking when I walked into a room, the subtle warnings tucked into conversations that didn't make sense at the time, the way strangers seemed to watch me too closely in places where I should have felt safe. Even my phone began glitching in ways I couldn't explain, calls dropping right when I thought I was getting close to something, messages disappearing before I could read them. Someone was out there controlling the narrative, deciding what I got to know and what I didn't. And the more I pushed, the more dangerous it became. I wasn't just being followed anymore, I was being cornered like a rat in a trap that had been set years before I even knew to look down. I thought about walking away, about pretending I never heard the name, about going back to life as if nothing had ever happened. But that wasn't an option anymore. The choice had been taken from me, and in its place, a much harsher truth had settled in. This was bigger than survival. It was about uncovering why my wife had been caught in the middle of something so carefully hidden, and why I had been dragged into it too. The betrayal, the conspiracy, the feeling of being watched, it all pointed to something massive, a scale I hadn't been able to wrap my mind around at first. And then it hit me, this wasn't just my wife's secret or my marriage's breaking point, or even a single man's name whispered in the dark. It was a story that threaded through families, through communities, maybe even through generations, a hidden network of ties and debts and promises no one was supposed to remember. I wasn't looking at a puzzle anymore. I was staring at a web, and I was already tangled in it. And as I finally realized how big this had become, I also understood something that froze my blood in my veins. Every step I had taken so far, every question I had asked, every door I had opened had been anticipated by someone else. I wasn't leading this search anymore, I was being led. The storm inside me had been brewing for weeks, and now it erupted with a force I didn't know I had the strength to withstand. Everything, every sleepless night, every whispered name, every shadow of doubt, had led me to this moment, where truth and deception finally collided. I stood in the abandoned house on the edge of town, the same one I had been warned never to enter, the one that had appeared in those old photographs and in the secret files hidden on my wife's laptop. My hands trembled as I held the final piece of evidence, a torn letter with her handwriting all over it, but not just hers. His, the name she whispered in the dark, scrawled right next to hers like a signature on a contract I was never meant to see. The walls of the house felt like they were closing in on me, suffocating me with the weight of every lie that had been told, and yet, despite the fear, I knew I couldn't turn back now. This was the climax, the point of no return, the moment where either I took control of the story or let it consume me completely. I wasn't alone. The sound of footsteps echoed from the back room, slow, deliberate, like someone who already knew I was here and had been waiting all along. My chest tightened, but instead of running, I tightened my grip on the letter and forced myself forward, each step heavier than the last. When the door creaked open and I saw her standing there, my wife, her face pale in the glow of the flickering light bulb above us, it felt like I was staring at both the woman I loved and a stranger who had been hiding in plain sight. "You weren't supposed to find this," she whispered, her voice trembling, but not from fear. No, it was something else, something closer to guilt or maybe even resolve. Behind her, in the shadows, another figure shifted, and for a moment I thought it was my paranoia again. But then he stepped forward, and the name she had whispered in her sleep finally had a face, and my world turned upside down. It wasn't some ghost or a figment of her imagination. It was a man, flesh and blood, his eyes locked on mine with a strange familiarity that made my skin crawl. He looked like he had been waiting for this meeting his entire life. And when my wife reached for his hand, my heart nearly stopped. The air thickened with betrayal, but before I could speak, he leaned forward and said the words that shattered everything I thought I knew. "I'm the one you should have been looking for all along." She was just protecting me. My mind reeled as fragments of the past, every warning, every red herring, every strange coincidence, clicked into place like puzzle pieces I had been too blind to see before. It wasn't just about her sleep, her whispers, or even the secrecy. It was about something far larger, something I had unknowingly stepped into. The room erupted into chaos as I demanded the truth, my voice breaking, begging for answers that I wasn't sure I even wanted anymore. My wife's tears fell, but she didn't move away from him, and in that instant, I realized she had been caught in this web long before I ever knew it existed. She wasn't the mastermind. She was a prisoner of her own secrets, chained to a past that had now come crashing into our present. But he wasn't finished. He pulled out a phone, showed me photos, documents, and recordings that exposed a network bigger than I could have ever imagined. This wasn't just about us, it was about others too, families shattered, lives destroyed, all tied to the same hidden conspiracy that had begun long before I ever married her. The final confrontation wasn't a fight with fists or weapons, it was a battle for my sanity, my trust, and my very perception of reality. Every word out of his mouth was designed to tear down everything I believed about my life, to force me into a choice I never wanted to face. My wife begged me to leave, to run while I still could, but how could I? How could I walk away knowing the truth was right here, staring me in the face, daring me to accept it? The walls shook as if the house itself couldn't contain the tension between us. My heart pounded as I took one final step forward, locked eyes with the man whose name had haunted my nights, and demanded to know why all of this had happened, why my wife had been dragged into it, why my entire world had been ripped apart. The answer he gave me wasn't what I expected. It wasn't revenge or obsession or even love. It was something far darker, something that tied me to him in a way I could never have imagined. "Because this story was never hers, it was yours," he said, his voice calm and chilling, and in that instant, I realized that I wasn't just a victim of this mystery, I had been a part of it all along. The letter in my hands burned with a new weight, the ink almost seeming to blur as my vision swam, and as the truth finally surfaced, I understood why my wife had whispered his name, why she had been so afraid of the dark, and why everything had led us here. But before I could process it, before I could demand the full explanation, the lights went out, plunging the room into darkness, and the sound of footsteps rushed toward me. And that's where I'll leave you, right on the edge of the truth, because sometimes the climax isn't about what you see, it's about what you can't unhear, what you can't unlearn, and the terrifying realization that the story you thought you were living was never really yours at all. When the dust finally settled and the storm of revelations began to quiet, the main character found themselves standing in a silence that felt heavier than the chaos that had come before it. Every lie that had been told, Every betrayal that had been unearthed, and every warning that had been ignored came rushing back in fragments, like broken glass catching the light in unexpected ways. They could finally see the full picture of what had been happening around them, and yet there was something unsettling in realizing that clarity didn't bring comfort, it brought weight. The truth wasn't a release, it was a burden, and it left scars that wouldn't fade quickly. It wasn't just about discovering who had been manipulating them or what hidden agendas had been playing out behind closed doors. It was about acknowledging how fragile trust really was, how easily it could be bent, twisted, and broken beyond repair. Even with answers in hand, the lingering feeling of dread whispered that this story wasn't entirely finished. The confrontation that had seemed inevitable had finally taken place, and the villain's face was no longer a mystery, yet in their final moments they left behind words that echoed louder than any action. You were never supposed to be part of this. That sentence, chilling in its simplicity, carried with it an entire world of unanswered questions. Why weren't they supposed to be involved? What larger game had they stumbled into by chance or fate? It was the kind of statement that worked like a seed in the mind, planting doubt that grew no matter how much one tried to suppress it. For the first time, the main character realized that everything they had uncovered might only be the surface of something deeper, darker, and more expansive than they could comprehend. The plot they had fought so hard to untangle may have ended here, but the roots of it stretched farther than they could ever imagine, perhaps touching lives and places far beyond their own. The relief of surviving, of clawing their way out of the maze of deception, didn't erase the damage that had been done. Relationships that once felt unshakable now sat on fragile foundations. Friends who had seemed loyal were forever marked by suspicion, and even those proven innocent carried the shadow of doubt. The main character felt a strange mix of gratitude and grief when they thought about the people who had stood by them. Gratitude for their support, grief for the innocence they had lost along the way. Their world had shifted permanently, and while they were breathing easier now, the weight of what they knew, what they had seen, pressed down on them in a way they couldn't easily escape. The more they tried to put the pieces back into place, the more they realized the old life they longed for no longer existed. There was no going back to normal, because normal had been revealed as a carefully constructed illusion all along. And yet, in the quiet aftermath, there was still something undeniably human about the way they tried to move forward. They sought comfort in simple things: the sound of the wind at night, the familiar creak of their home settling, the warmth of holding on to someone they still trusted. These details, mundane yet grounding, reminded them that life continued despite the horrors that had been uncovered. They clung to these reminders as anchors, proof that not everything had been corrupted or stolen from them. But beneath it all, beneath the fragile sense of peace that began to build, was an undercurrent of vigilance. They couldn't shake the sense that the story wasn't entirely closed, that there was a page missing from the final chapter. And in that awareness, they found themselves caught in a delicate balance between relief and anticipation, a mix of closure and the unsettling knowledge that some shadows never really disappear. As the camera of their life pulled back, as if giving the audience one last wide shot of everything they had endured, the main character walked forward into an uncertain tomorrow, carrying both the scars of their ordeal and the faint spark of resilience that had kept them alive through it all. They had faced betrayal, danger, and truths that nearly shattered them, but they had survived. And maybe survival was the only resolution that mattered. Still, as they turned a corner, they noticed something small, barely visible, yet impossible to ignore. A folded note tucked beneath their door, waiting silently as if it had been there all along. Their hearts skipped, their breath caught, and the audience was left with the haunting question: was this truly the end or just the beginning of something even darker?